You're listening to the Erica and McAfee podcast, a faith-based podcast for Black women and women of color to share stories of grief and loss due to miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, with journeys of trying to conceive and infertility. Welcome to episode 36 of the Erica and McAfee podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial by visiting audibletrial.com/Erica. In today's episode, we have Bettye Williams, who shares her SIDS stories of 4-month-old daughter, Bailey Nicole. On June 26, 2015, Bettye lost her 4-month-old daughter, Bailey Nicole, to SIDS. It was the most devastating, life-shattering experience of her life. Trouble is inevitable in this life, but when you lose a child so suddenly and so unexpectedly in their death, a part of you dies as well. One day, while struggling to get through the day, Bettye fell to her knees and asked the Lord to not only strengthen her, but to open her eyes up so that she can see the purpose in all the pain she was feeling. Bettye reminded him of his promise in Romans 8:28, and after pouring her heart out to God and weeping with much despair, she stood up. Immediately she felt the burden lift. The Lord put on her heart to just right, and that's what she did. She created Bailey's Dash Foundation with the goal of assisting other families who were grieving. She decided to share some of her transparent moments with Facebook, and within 3 weeks, there were over 15,000 followers to her Bailey's Dash page. She knew that this was a portion of God's greater plan in her life, and we discussed this in this interview, as well as her up-and-coming book, as she's an up-and-coming author. I hope that you all enjoy. Here is Bettye Williams. Well, thank you, Bettye, for being a part of the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so grateful that you reached out to me.
Well, let the listeners know about yourself. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay, so my name is Bettye Nicole, and I am a soon-to-be author. I am an angel mom. I am one who loves the Lord and who has been through really tough times in this life. And just within the last 2 years, I lost my daughter, and you know, sometimes when we go through life, we think we know pain. We think we understand what it feels like to hurt. And so we experience heartbreak maybe in relationships or just even loss of a family member. But then there's this whole other aspect of losing a child that we have to walk through, and it changes you. And so, yes, that I think that I'm kind of going off the question.
I just asked to tell us about yourself. But you're talking. So go ahead and just tell us about your loss story since you're going in, and because you did talk about how much it changes you. So let's talk about your loss story.
Yeah. Okay, so 2 years ago, it was actually on June 26, 2015, I woke up to check on my daughter, Bailey Nicole, and I remember standing in the closet. I was actually getting ready for an interview, but then it was like a soft, nudge to just say, okay, go over to the crib and check on her. And so I proceeded over to her crib, and it was something that was just heavy on my heart, like just rubber. So I kind of touched her leg, and it felt really, really hard and stiff. And I was just thinking, like, oh no, Lord, like I know this isn't what I'm thinking. So I kind of rubbed her back, and I tell you, it was just like a cold. She was just literally frozen. And so I ran out the room, and I was just yelling for my husband to come upstairs and just asking him, and praying and just saying, Lord, no, you're not doing this to me. And that day was the beginning to, that day forever changed my life. Bailey passed away the night before, but because we found her the next morning, she was pronounced dead. And yeah, that's what happened. Bailey, she ended up passing away, and the autopsy came back that same day. The pathologists did all their workups and everything, and it came back that she had passed away from SIDS.
So how did that impact you and impact your faith in God?
Well, you know what? It really shook the foundation and the core of my faith. And it's because, when you grow up in church and when you grow up knowing that God answers prayers, and you know that God is a faithful God, and if you knock, you shall seek. All these scriptures that we know about praying and asking the Lord to help us. And then we also think on the other aspect of you reap what you sow, or if you live a certain way, then these are the fruits that you should see. Mm-hmm. So then when you're living that way, and then when you're doing the things that the Lord is requiring of you to the best of the ability that you can do it, and then when something like that so suddenly strikes you, it shakes you. And it shook the very core of everything that I believe, because I was so resentful, not of God and but just of his will. I didn't understand why he would allow such a thing to happen to me. And so I just remember laying on the couch for days and just saying, I'm not going to pray. What's the purpose of praying? God's going to do what he wants to do anyway. Like, why am I going to even make my request known to him? Because he's going to do what he wants to do anyway. And that's where I was for probably a month or so. I couldn't even utter a prayer. I couldn't even find it in my heart, or the words could not even form in my lips to say, Lord, why did you allow this? And I know I would say that, but it really wasn't a prayer. It was more so of I don't even really know how to describe it, but it was something so different, and it really shifted our relationship. Because one good thing I would say about that dark time is that I realized that prayer wasn't this long, where we get down and we say, oh, Lord, thou art good. For me, it became, Lord, where are you? And why did you allow this? It became personal.
Mm-hmm. So were you all able to have a memorial service for her, a funeral, and actually spend time with her before you had to let her go?
Okay, so the day actually when the coroner came in to actually carry her out, my children were in the home as well. I have 3 other children, and they were crying and they were begging, the police officers to allow them to see her before they carried her out. I never looked at her. I didn't have enough strength in me to just see my daughter in that state. Mm-hmm. Now, a few days later, my best friend actually went before me to view, to kind of get things set up for us, and then we ended up going, and I went to spend time with her, and I'm so grateful that I did during that time, because that was the last time that I actually got to see her in the way that I remembered her. Because during her memorial service today, actually, I went up there the day before her funeral, and she was so dark and gray, and she just had changed so drastically, and I was just so devastated because, of how different she looked. So I'm so grateful that I did get that chance before she was actually embalmed.
Mm-hmm. From this point on, we kind of talked about how it impacted your faith in God. How did it impact your children, the other children you have, and your family members? How did this loss impact everyone around you?
It really impacted them, and I would say it's kind of twofold, because it was like a good thing, a bad thing, but then it turned out to be a good thing. During that day, they were crying, and I remember so vividly my daughter saying, well, is God even real? Mm-hmm. Is he even real? Because why isn't he answering us? Because they were crying out, please save her, please. We all were crying and all just, just crying out to the Lord. And it seemed as though heaven was just so quiet. And I believe that at the time, they didn't fully understand. They were just like, okay, well, we've been going to church all this time. We've been hearing these things, and we're to always pray about things, and we're praying. So why us? Why now? Why our sister? Mm-hmm. But then now on the other side of that is they get to see how God can take something so terrible and something that could break a family and surely tear them apart, but see how God can use that to build and to show his healing power and show that he can take something that was meant for evil and work it out for your good, meaning he can bring your family closer in these situations. He actually brought family members and other family who hadn't spoken with each other for years over petty issues. The Lord allowed her death to bring them together, you know. So it's a twofold thing there, and God is still working that thing out in their life and still healing them, you know, as well as my other family, as well as me. So it's a continuous thing, but I don't think it was all bad.
Right. Let's talk about your foundation. Like, what inspired you to start Bailey's Dash Foundation, and what are you all doing?
Okay, so Bailey's Dash Foundation was founded out of just despair, out of hopelessness, and I remember one day I was just sitting in my house, and I tell you, I didn't know if I was coming or going. I was just that out of my mind, and it wasn't that I was like out of my mind, but I was just so depressed. I was so hopeless. I mean, I was filled with hopelessness. Mm-hmm. And I remember my children and my spouse was headed out, and I was so glad that they were leaving, because I had determined in my heart that day that I was just going to cry out to God, you know. And so when they left out the house, I just dropped down to my knees, and I just began to wail and wail and wail. And I just said, Lord, you allowed this thing to happen to me. Like, you allowed this. You have to make good of this. You promised, you know, to work all things together for the good of those. Lord, you have to work this together. You know, you have to work this together for my good. Please just strengthen me. Just give me enough strength to put together something, or just give me something. And I just cried out, and it was so pure, and it was so transparent, and it was just me and the Lord. And I remember rising up that day, and it was almost like a burden had kind of lifted. And I think in that moment, because I had not talked to God mm-hmm. in the way that I usually would have, you know, that our relationship was kind of coming back together. And because although I knew I needed him, I wasn't going to him in my heavy stages of grief. So a lot of times the Lord will allow you to grieve, and he will comfort you. He will carry you, but he waits for that day when you come back to him and say, okay, Lord, I've tried this thing on my own. I need you to help me. And that's what it was. I went to him, and literally I got up, and I was sitting on the couch, and it just came to my mind. It was like the Holy Spirit laid it on my mind. Create a Facebook page, mm-hmm. create a Flipgram, you know, and it just came to me. And Bailey's Dash was the name. Bailey's Dash actually comes from the dash that is always on the headstones at the funeral. You know, in our life, we're given a dash. It's our birth date and our death date, and then in between there is the dash. Mm. And so I, you know, took that portion and said, okay, we'll say Bailey's Dash Foundation. My whole goal in starting that was to reach out to other families and other moms, because I understand that when you encourage others, you encourage yourself, you know, you encourage yourself as well. Mm-hmm. So I began to just, you know, pour out my heart on Facebook and just do different things. And before I knew it, the Lord was just sending people in droves. They were just coming and liking my posts and sharing and donating. And I knew in that moment that not only did the Lord hear my prayer when I cried out to him that day when you know, they left, when my children and everyone left the home, but I also knew that was God showing his faithfulness. Mm-hmm. That was his faith, you know. And although numbers doesn't count, you know, people coming, that means nothing in the grand scheme of things. But for me, in those moments, it did, because I would hear from women who would say, you know, they would be 60 years old and say, hey, you know, I buried my son 40 years ago, and I've still not been able to cope with it. And to see you encouraging others, and, you know, you're freshly in it, you're giving me hope. And I found hope in giving hope to others through Jesus Christ, you know?
Today's episode is brought to you by sistersinloss.com. We are holding a Sisters in Loss brunch on April 21st, 2018 in Chesapeake, Virginia. The Sisters in Loss community is a community of Christian Black women who have experienced a loss due to a miscarriage, infant or child loss, pregnancy loss, stillbirth, or infertility. Our mission is to tackle the difficult questions around grief, loss, marriage, love, and self-care while on the journey of healing through the Word of God, gaining clarity and peace by the power of testimonies, and in finding an empowering path forward after loss. This year's theme is From Surviving to Thriving. The brunch is kicking off National Infertility Awareness Week, which is April 22nd through 28th, 2018. Our goal is to provide the women in attendance there a support community for their grief journey, hope after loss, and to go from surviving to thriving after loss. For more information on the Sisters in Loss brunch, visit sistersinloss.com. What does your organization do, and who does it impact? Does it impact you all in that St. Louis, Illinois area, or have you had a global impact?
Well, I really would say that I have had a global impact as far as the providing hope goes. Now, what we did was I wanted to assist families who needed assistance with burial and the cost and all those things. When Bailey passed away, she did not have insurance, and I was not able to add her into my insurance. I didn't think she would pass away so soon. So all those costs and everything, my family had to cover. And so I was grateful that, I did have the assistance, but then it just made me think about all the other young moms and all the other young families who are not as fortunate as I was in my season, in my situation, who needs that extra, $200 or $300 to kind of help them lift the load. It's one thing to grieve, but then it's a whole nother thing to have to worry about burial and putting together obituaries and service programs and all of those things. So that was where my heart was in the beginning. I was like, okay, I'm going to pour myself out into that. But then it's almost like the Lord has continued to just let me be that ear for moms and be that hope for them in their situation. So financially, I've not been able to do what I've planned to do, but I believe I've done more of an impact by providing encouragement and just being an ear for moms who, just wake up and find themselves in the situation that I was in, and they're able to search Bailey's Dash and call me anytime, and reach me and just pour their heart out and know that I've been in their same shoes, and know that they can, find strength in me because the Lord allowed me to make it through.
Yes, he definitely has. And being that hope and that support is just what some people need. That's just all that some people need throughout the journey. So I definitely agree. And definitely you all go to baileysdash.org, and then of course your Facebook page, where you do have a lot of people following you and looking at your journey. So you all go like Bailey's Dash on Facebook as well. So Betty, tell us about your book and your inspiration for writing your book.
Okay, so this book is very near and dear to my heart. After walking through grief and then getting to the other side of healing, the Lord began to deal with me on sharing my journey and sharing that really, really low place and the place where I was, and then also be very transparent and just be very raw in my words in walking through that process, and then, like I said, getting to the other side and knowing God to be a healer, and knowing God to be a God who keeps his promises, and to know that you're never really alone. And I think that anyone who's ever experienced loss, be it our infertility or anything, a lot of times you feel isolated in those situations. You feel as though, no one understands what you're going through. And, you can meet and speak with maybe 10 or 15 other women, and you guys' stories can be similar, but when it comes to the pain, and when it comes to you describing your pain, it truly never compares, because our grief journey is different. So, like I said, the Lord just impressed upon my heart to just write what's real, and then write the facts, and then just write my truth, and then write God's truth. And so that's what I did. I literally poured my heart, poured my emotion, and poured God's faithfulness into this project.
Awesome. So can you tell us the name of your book and when will it be out?
Okay, so that is a tricky thing.
Okay.
Because I'm going in between like 3 different ones. And it's my first book, so I feel like it's like my baby. And it's like I want to make sure that I do everything the right way, because I just truly believe it's going to do well. I just believe that. So I don't know what the name of the book is, but you know what? Another thing that I do want to add to the mix is that I not only shared my journey during pregnancy, and then grief, and then the healing, but I also shared the months prior to me finding out that I was pregnant. I went back a little bit into my childhood, just so you can kind of get to see where I came from. And I also wanted to share a portion of my marital status, and how grief affected my marriage life, because I think that that's very important to talk about. A lot of times when people go through grief, a lot of couples, when they're grounded in their faith and when they know God, they draw closer. But that wasn't that wasn't my truth, and that wasn't the reality, and that isn't what God did in my life. So it was very important for me to share that. So again, yes, I do not know the name, but we should. It's going through its final round of editing now. I just received the foreword today, so prayerfully within the next few months, the book will be ready. And again, I'm very grateful that God just trusted me with this, and just trusted me and graced me to even share this, because I'm just grateful. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Bettye, and I look forward to sharing your book with our audience once it comes out.
Yes, it's going to be awesome. I look forward to sharing it.
So what are some resources or tools or books that are out there that helped you through your journey?
Okay, that's a really, really good question, because you know what? I really did not, to be honest, I could not read a whole lot of things on grief, because it described how they felt, and how they felt was not how I felt. So it's tough for me to draw strength from that, because I would say, well, no, I didn't go about it that way, or I didn't believe it that way. And then, as far as going to the SIDS resources, Lord forbid, I would tell any mom, do not go that route, because you're going to go down a road of blaming yourself and feeling as though, well, maybe I should have did this, or maybe I shouldn't have laid her in the crib, or maybe I shouldn't have. It's so many. It's so sad, those websites. But that's a whole nother podcast. But. So the resources that I would use, and just to be honest, I literally cling to my Bible. I would read the Psalms, and I would go to different stories, scriptures where King David and all these other Bible characters who were Bible people, I wouldn't say they're characters, but who lost children as well. Yes. And I've seen how they cope with it. And then not only just lost children, but who had other situations that they had to deal with. And I watched and I studied, and I picked up the principles from what they did, which was fasting and praying and just getting closer to the Lord, and allowing the Lord to remove whoever he needed to remove, and stay, and even when you go to that place of isolation, I believe after grief, because, when your child first passed away, everyone is around you, and then you have a funeral and everyone's there. But then it's like, as soon as they lower your baby into the ground, it's just you. Then it's just you, and then it's just your husband and your children, and then it's really just you, because you're the mom. And so my hope and all of my resources literally came from Scripture. I can't even really. I've read different blogs and stuff like that. Nothing comes to mind, but I really tried to stay away from the internet. I needed to get to know God in a deeper way myself before I branched out and started reading and getting other people's interpretation on how I should grieve.
Right, and I completely understand that, and that's everybody has their ways of going about it, but sometimes you do need to shut out the outside world and shut off Google, because Google can get us in trouble sometimes.
Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord.
What encouraging or inspiring words can you leave the other lost moms that are out there, especially the ones who've experienced SIDS?
One thing I would say is that God is faithful. I would start there. God is faithful, and that there is nothing in this world that He would allow to come into your life that He has not already pre-planned and that He has not already given you the strength to walk through it. And I've said this over the last few weeks, that life sometimes can feel like death. After you lose a child, or after you go through a divorce or go through a certain situation, life can feel like death. And David the psalmist, he explained it in the greatest way possible. He said that though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, though he wasn't dying, his life and his circumstances and the things that he had lost and everything that he's seen and everything that was in his view felt like death. And life sometimes feels that way for us. But if I can encourage you, and if I can say anything, you keep walking, you keep trusting. You have to know that the God who allowed this thing, if you will give it over to Him, if you will turn it over to Him, that He will see you through. He's so faithful. And people aren't faithful. Things aren't faithful. Things fall apart, but God does it. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And if there's nothing else that He's great at, He heals a broken heart. He will mend you. And all of those broken parts and all those broken pieces that seem to be unmendable, or seem to have shattered in so many pieces, where it seems as though there's no way, and surely there's no light at the end of the tunnel. God is always there, and He's with you in that tunnel. He's there at the end. And all those broken pieces, every broken piece, everything that you don't understand that had to happen in your life that you consider broken, God will take those pieces and He will create a beautiful mosaic art out of your heart. And though it would have been broken, people would see those broken pieces, but they would also see the beautifying work of Jesus Christ and see that the healing work that only He can do. No one else can do it. So I would encourage you just to turn to Him and just read His Word and study it and pick up the principles, trusting in Him and knowing that He loves you. Sometimes when we are in our dark seasons, we feel as though God doesn't love us. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. That's of the enemy. God loves you, and He loves you so much that even in your pain, even in your not understanding, He promised to make good out of those things. What the enemy meant for evil, God always works out for our good.
Yes, He does. Amen. So where can we find you on social?
So I am on Instagram. I'm at Bailey's Dash, so that's Bailey's _dash. On Facebook, it's Bailey's Dash, and my personal page is Bettye Nicole. But and then now I just started a 24-hour line that I opened up for mothers who want to call, or just who needs encouragement or who needs hope. That phone number is 618-709-7677. So you can call me any time of the day. I'm like y'all sister. I'm just a regular old girl who knows the pain, who knows pain, but also knows that God can walk you through it. So you can reach me there. You can reach me via email, baileys@gmail.com, and I'm just pretty much around.
Awesome. And then you said that you have a book coming out? Is that book coming out soon?
Yes, I do. Yes, prayerfully it will be done by the end of December. That's where I'm shooting. So I have I don't really want to give the name of it out yet, but prayerfully I can have the pre-orders up by December 15th. That's my prayer.
All right. So we may have to have you back on in the new year so you can talk about your book once it's up and running.
Yes, it's very, I've not even been able to reread it because it's so pure and it's so transparent, and I can't even take it.
Wow. So it's about your lost story then.
It's about my loss, but it's a lot more in depth, and it's a lot of different things that I talked about that a lot of people don't know that I've dealt with and things like that. So yeah, it's pretty deep.
All right. I'm excited. I'm excited to read it and excited to learn more. So you all go and follow Bailey's Dash and follow Bettye. Thank you again, Bettye, for being a part of the podcast and sharing your story and your life.
No problem. No problem. Thank you so much for reaching out, and God bless you.
God bless you too. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I pray the show was inspirational and a blessing to you. The show notes and links for today's podcast can be found on ericaandmcafee.com/podcast. Please join us offline in our private Facebook group at sistersandloss.com. Please rate and leave a 5-star review of the show in Apple Podcasts or where you listen to podcasts. Keep the faith, and I'll talk to you next Wednesday.